Truth and beauty in the cinema. Why did I choose truth and beauty, and why did I choose the word cinema? Cinema instead of movies or flicks. One way of answering that is this way. Jaws was a 1978 masterpiece by Steven Spielberg. Sharknado is a flick. So you've got the same basic story, sharks trying to eat people, but one is trying to do something that is transcendent, is done artistically. The other one's like, look, we know we're just messing around, let's just have fun, and if we sell a bunch of commercials, then great. And they ended up selling a lot of commercials and making a lot of money on that. One of the best B-movie stories ever is Sharknado. But that's the difference between a flick and a movie, or film. But cinema is even a step further. I chose that word because cinema wraps into it the whole experience. And when I say I love film, I love going to a crowded theater on opening night. We saw Endgame on opening night, and then we went back a few weeks later. Totally different experience. People were cheering and laughing and gasping and crying, and it was just like, I don't mind being interrupted a little bit, because if it's a good movie, I guarantee you I'm going to see it again. So if somebody's like getting somewhat engaged with at the screen, I'm happy. I'm like, yeah, okay, let's get into it. That's why you go and you do it collectively. It's like you can do church by listening to an MP3 and some songs, but that's not the same thing as sitting in the pews and the communal experience. We're meant to be community creatures, right? That's how God made us. And so I think cinema taps into that. I even love things like the sticky floors if they have, spilled pop or popcorn. I love everything about it. I love the previews. In fact, I'm really irritable. Ask my family. If we can't get there in time for all the previews, I'm like, come on. They're like, it doesn't start. I said, it starts right when they say it's going to start, because I want to see all the upcoming previews, which isn't as big of a deal anymore since you can watch trailers online, all day long. But back in the day, I'll tell you how geeky I am about this. I used to have to get there for the previews, and I would stay until the last credit, until no animals were killed or injured in the filming of this movie, because I would sit there and I would study. Like, okay, I remember him from this movie. Then Internet Movie Database came out, and that wasn't as important because I could go and I could look for all those links online. But I wanted to see the team of people it took to put together, because if a film is good, it's good because someone came up with a good story, somebody came up with a good script. That's not easy to do. I took script writing. It's so easy to be bad at that. It is not an easy art form. Then you had to have somebody to be the executive producer. That takes some skill to know, okay, these are the best people I'm going to assemble, and then they have to all do their job right. If you ever want to get a piece or an idea, every role, obviously director and actors, but even the actors, they could be the best actors in the world. You've seen people who got Oscars, and then you see them in some low budget movie, and it's, oh my gosh, that's awful. Because the dialogue's bad, the story's bad. So it doesn't matter how good the actor is if the script isn't good. But there is I don't remember what edition it was for Star Wars, a DVD set that came out, but they have hours and hours and hours of behind the scenes, backstory, all that. And one of them was the film, as it was getting put together, looked like a really cheap, cheesy, B-grade, the old sci-fi. The reason no one put money into sci-fi is because they had that reputation of being, just the equivalent of a kid playing with his action figures on screen. And if you look at the 50s and 60s sci-fis, that's kind of what they were. They thought Star Wars was going to be along the same lines, but took a little bit of a chance at it. And they showed you what the footage looked like before James Earl Jones did Darth Vader, and it was horrible. Before the sound effects, before they cleaned up the film. And then they showed you even all of that without John Williams' soundtrack. And you're sitting there going, oh my gosh, we're going to sit here for 2 hours watching this? But then they show you all of it together, and you're just, oh my, you're blown away. The Star Wars theme is one of the most probably well-known themes in all of music, certainly in film history. So that's an example of, if all of that's done right, but you have a bad soundtrack, then it's still not a great film. It's still not. So cinema is the experience, the fellowship or community at least, and then all the artists that are putting their art into the film. And if you don't have a good director tying it all together, it still doesn't matter. Because John Williams has cut some soundtracks for some films that were, they're okay. It was John Williams, so it had a good soundtrack, but it didn't, no one remembers the film. So it takes everything. So that's what I mean by cinema. Truth and beauty I'm going to go into later, but why I chose those words, I hope it becomes clear. So the elephant in the room whenever Christians start talking about going to the movies is how bad they are, you know, in terms of what is and isn't on the screen. That probably came out pretty loud. Ministries, whole ministries have come up, nonprofits that do nothing but screen films and then warn you about, you know, how many F-bombs, how many S-bombs, how many, they catalog of how many words there are, which is, I'm not downing that. That's a service and I think it should be there. However, if you only look at what the film lacks, you're going to miss something. Also, if you only look at the rating of the film, you're going to miss something. So I already told you guys the answer last week, but what's the #1 worldwide box office record holder that has an R rating? In other words, what's the #1 box office success as R? Yep, The Passion of the Christ. So if you just were simple and said, don't watch R-rated movies, you wouldn't go see the crucifixion of Jesus. And not just the crucifixion, but the torture and the Garden of Gethsemane. I mean, everyone here has seen The Passion? Okay, because it's really worth seeing more than once.
It could have been NC-17. If he'd have just...
Yeah,
he just had... If he wouldn't have he could have actually cut it back in a couple times.
They actually did hold back, right, in a few different ways. You're right. But Mel Gibson was the first one to say everything that's been put to film so far, Cecil B. DeMille and others, of what Jesus went through, cheapens what the price he paid, how hard it was for him as human to press on and not call down the angels like he could have. So yeah, that's important to remember, that if you just say, I'm not going to watch anything that's R-rated, then you're going to miss out on films like that. And I could go on about some other films that are R-rated that had a lot of redeeming values in them. A lot of historical things that are, like, well, Schindler's List. We're going to talk about that a little bit. You wouldn't go see Schindler's List if it was only about the rating system. And on that note, there's an organization called the Dove Foundation. You may have heard of them. They were real big back in the late 80s, early 90s, all the way up until Blockbuster Video started to kind of downsize and ultimately went away. What their deal was, we're not going to tell you what's in the movie. We're not going to waste time counting F-bombs and all that. We're not going to protest Hollywood and tell them what they should and shouldn't do. All we want to do is we'll watch the movies, and if it doesn't get above a certain threshold, then we'll say it's Dove approved. In other words, family friendly. You can watch it with your kids. You're not going to be embarrassed, is what their deal was. So they did quite well for a long time. I'm not sure, they still exist. You go to their website, they have articles and whatnot. But I remember when when Schindler's List was coming out in the theater. Here you've got a movie. Has everybody seen Schindler's List?
No.
You haven't seen it yet? It's about the Holocaust. So
It looked depressing.
It is.
I know.
In many ways.
I just don't see things because I just don't want to be depressed, but I should see it.
You should force yourself to watch that one, just because I feel like it's one of those things that, especially with all the anti-Semitism that's coming up again, and the Holocaust deniers that mostly from other countries, but they're out there. It's just important to just feel it, like even in a small way, how evil it really, really was, and that hopefully will keep. That was Spielberg's goal, and after that, he started foundations, Oscar Schindler Foundation, I think it was called. But the point is, you have the Dove Foundation, which was not a Christian group. It was conservative atheists, Jews, maybe some Muslims, I don't know, just people who were culturally conservative, and that was they were pro-family, and they believed that there was an erosive effect that violence and nudity and swearing and all these things had on society. So they agreed on that. What their reason was for believing that, they didn't bother with. So given that there were a number of Jews and then Christians, of course, who appreciate the Jewish nation and we support Israel. Schindler's List comes out. And so for several years by then, they had been telling people, no, don't go see this because it has nudity, don't see this because it has violence. They're like, what do we do? We can't give it our approval. It has everything in it that we say don't go see. But we really want people to see it. It's important that they see it. So they were stuck with a dilemma. So they said, okay, it can't get our approval, but they wrote a whole front page article on their journal that came out. It's a newsletter that came out every few months that I got. And I was really like, okay, what are they going to do with this one? And it was really interesting. They said, it doesn't have our approval. So it has nudity, violence, and swearing, of course, and drinking. And I mean, it was just everything in it. Schindler was a bad guy. And of course, the Holocaust was really, really, really bad. The Nazis were about as evil as you can get. So what they said was, we still recommend you go see it. If you're an adult, I think you should see it. Now, with kids, that's the next question. What do you do with your children? And they said at about 12 years old, somewhere around there, you know your kids best, maybe a little younger, maybe a little bit older, but around there, watch it with them, with the lights on in the room, because sometimes some of that violence can be a little too intense, and the lights being on in the room helps, deaden it a little bit, and then discuss it with them either along the way or afterwards. So they gave you like instructions on how to watch it. But that's when it occurred to me that it's this system of Christians saying what isn't in the film, that doesn't work. It's not enough. Because we have examples, Passion of the Christ wasn't out yet, but there were still examples. The movie Glory is one of the best films ever. It's R-rated because of I think it was R or PG-13. I better check on that before I say it. But it's not G and it's not PG because there's some graphic violence because it's a war movie. Amistad is either about to come out, I think, it was after Schindler's List. So again, it's got everything in it that you just, if you want to check boxes, it's violent. It has, there's one scene of nudity when they were treating the slaves like they were cattle, and so they just usher them through like they're cattle. And so it's not at all like with Schindler's List. You're not sitting there going, oh, this is great nudity. This is I can't even want to watch because it's so awful what they're doing to people. So that's the warning, I guess, is not to have the simplistic, well, what's the rating, and then just go with that. So how do we even get the ratings in the first place? And what has Hollywood's relationship to violence and sex and all these things that we watch out for? Is it the case that, which is commonly said, that it's getting worse and worse and worse and worse, or not? In the Roaring '20s, Hollywood had gotten so bad, just like the culture, but it had gotten so bad. In fact, there were tabloids back then too. There was a murder, a well-publicized murder, and then there was a well-publicized rape. And the guy who committed the rape was a major box office star at the time. And so there was scandals, just like we have today, that was really starting to upset the American public. And plus, they were bothered by certain things that were on the screen. But if you go back and watch them now, you'd be like, really? Seriously? Like, it was a kiss. It was, they were standing up in the day with their clothes on and they kiss, and the public was upset about that. So we would probably think they were being prudish on that part. But it was enough, combined with the scandals off screen, that America was starting to say, we don't want you just to do whatever you want. We want some sort of assurances that when we go and take our family or just go by ourselves, that we're not going to be surprised by something. So it got so bad because of the scandals, there was obvious threat that somebody might step in. There were, most states had laws on the books, or they were getting ready to vote on them to impose different standards in different states. It would have been unwieldy how they would have kept up. So they said, okay, we got to step in and just say that we'll regulate ourselves. So that's when the Motion Picture Production Code was put into place. And this is the group that oversaw this ultimately became the MPAA, the Motion Picture Association of America. So that was the birth of it. They actually hired a pretty well-known, he was the president or the head of the RNC, a Republican, conservative, and he held that position for over 3 decades. So he did a lot to help, keep Hollywood in check. And one of the external pressures that was put on them actually was by Catholics. It's called the National Legion of Decency. It was also known as the Catholic Legion of Decency. And what they threatened was, because it's Catholics, they have wrong theology, but here's one of their theological commitments. If we say that something is a mortal sin or a venial sin or the type of sin, then it is. There's no arguing it. All of our people, and at the time there were 20 million Catholics in America, we will just simply instruct them not to go see your movies if you don't clean it up. So here are all of our standards of decency. You have to make sure you match our standards of decency. So we agree with that to a large degree, but obviously we don't agree with we're going to threaten your eternal soul if you go see these movies. But that has obviously a powerful effect, if the Catholics say that it's going to happen. Finally, there was the MPAA, the Motion Picture Association of America rating system. What had happened was, after World War II, television actually came on. You might know the story that Mickey Mouse Club was on TV, and it was just at the very beginning in the 30s when people were starting to watch regular television. But because of World War II, it went black. They just cut it out. Development was too expensive. They had to put their resources to the war. And so when the war was over, TV was ready. It had all this technology and even content, Disney and others, ready to go. So it came on with a vengeance. The theater owners in Hollywood itself couldn't compete right away. They lost a lot of money, so they had to start thinking of new and creative ways. That's actually in the 30s is when things like popcorn came. It used to be considered incredibly offensive to eat at a movie. If you went to a flick, and you would dress up in your best suit, it was like you were going to see Phantom of the Opera on opening night to go see a movie. That's what movies used to be, which is why all the movie houses like Fox Theaters are both stage and film theaters, because it was considered a very high-class thing to do. But then they started losing that, so they had to do other things, and then they started losing. So the history of Hollywood has not been one of making money hand over fist. It was a lot of money, then America started to pull back, and they had to find new and creative ways. So you'd find things like exhibition styles, like drive-in theaters came up to try and get people to go. Other things like serving popcorn and drinks to try and, not alcoholic drinks, but pop to get them to come in and enjoy themselves, but then it also created a mess. So they had to keep fighting the image of this is like a low budget entertainment now. 3D films came out to try and hook people away from the television to come in, and bigger name, bigger and bigger productions, all that. And one of the things they use to try and get people to come in is to put a little bit more violence, a little bit more believable plots, which meant a little bit more, edgy, to compete with television. Otherwise, people were just going to sit home. If you get the exact same square black and white image on the screen, so color became widespread, even though it had been invented long before the 50s, it was widespread in the 50s because they needed to get people off the couch and out of their living rooms into Hollywood and into the theaters. So that's the history. It has not been one of a pure Pollyanna kind of industry that's gotten progressively worse, really bad in the 1960s, and then we've just been it isn't like that. It's sort of this back and forth relationship with America, and it's been mostly them trying to give us stuff that we don't want. And then in 1968 is when the MPAA came out. The Babylon Bee, you guys know the Babylon Bee?
Yep.
I love it. Every once in a while it comes up on my news feed, and I'll go and I'll get caught for a half hour just watching it. Oh, that's hilarious. So here's it's a fake news site. It's sarcasm, satire. U.S. reports from around the country indicated a popular Christian movie was really reminiscent of secular movies, except that it omitted all the secular counterparts: cussing, violence, sex, nudity, and quality. That's my basic position toward Christian film. It get really tiresome going to film school, studying these things, trying to talk to Christians, reading the reviews and hearing their recommendations. It was always about what it's not, what isn't in the film. And I'm like, okay, yeah, I totally think you have to do that, but what is in the film? So you had movies like Schindler's List, let's say, don't go see that. Or let me think of something like a little bit more Glory. Okay, so Glory is just an amazingly inspiring film. Have you guys seen that one? World War, it's a Civil War. You've seen it. You're like in tears at the end, right? You want to go out and fight injustice, and it's amazing. But it's a war film, so there's violence. There's no nudity or sex or anything like that. It's just straight up war violence. Most of it's drama. Okay, so on the one hand, you're telling me not to go see that movie because what is in it. But then you say, yeah, go see Pocahontas and The Lion King. Movies that completely rip apart the Christian worldview and tell your children, vulnerable ages, that pantheism and panentheism is the way the world operates. I was more offended by that than I was at, a little violence in a war movie. I mean, I kind of gave them slack if someone got shot fighting for someone else's freedom. And yet Christians constantly were coming out with warnings against things, and most of them were right. I mean, when you're saying don't go see The Last Temptation of Christ, yeah, I was right there with them. Don't go see that. But they would just make blanket statements about movies based on what elements were in it. And then movies that, like I said, just completely bad philosophies, bad tearing down our religion.
Star Wars.
Well, we're going to talk about Star Wars, actually. I got slides for that one. That's what always bothered me is, and this is, so the quality part. It's let's see, what movie was that? I was talking about it last week. The movie Backdraft. I didn't have a slide for it, that's why I can't remember. Anybody not seen Backdraft?
I've seen it.
It's pretty good. I don't think it's overly violent or anything. It's probably only PG-13 even.
Like 25 years old.
Really old, yeah. There used to be a Backdraft ride.
I was thinking about the.
It's like
It's a new one now.
No, I saw Backdraft, and I thought you were talking about that Kirk Cameron.
Fireproof?
Fireproof, yeah.
Oh, no. I won't say, I'm on recording,
Be nice.
I won't be specific. But maybe it's up there, but anyway. So the movie, nothing really major point to make. It's just a fire film, there's a mystery, it's a crime to solve because an arson keeps setting fire. But it's weird because these fires are bad enough that they quickly start and kill somebody, but then they quickly go out. And so by the time the fire department shows up, there's no fire to put out. And so finding the cause is difficult because it's because they use the backdraft. So you start a small fire, cuts off the oxygen, somebody comes, opens a door or a window, oxygen comes in, reignites, rekindles the fire, and then that's the big explosion. But the explosion that kills everyone, and destroys everything in the room also snuffs out all the oxygen and puts it out. So this fire is like a in and out, in and out. So trying to figure out what it is. And they keep going back to prison. There's a guy who is basically serving life because every parole he gets, he's crazy. He actually is crazy. He enjoys fire, loves to see things burn. And that's, what's his name? Sutherland's character. Remember that one? Guy in jail. So the detectives would go and interview him sometimes to get some insight on the mechanics. Okay, when you were in arson, would you have done it this way? What else can we be looking for? And he would help them out. But he's crazy, so it's always a little creepy when they're talking to him. At one point, when they're really close to discovering who the arson is, but they can't get themselves to think outside the box, he's sitting there talking to them. They're describing the facts of the case. And this arson, played by Sutherland, says, all right, tell me the facts. And they say all these things about the backdraft. And he said, okay, now this person obviously knows a lot about how fire works. He says, yeah. But he calls it the beast, but he won't let the beast come out and play. He said, now who is it you know who knows a lot about the beast but doesn't love it? And you're like, a fireman. So the person that was setting all these fires and killing everybody was a fireman. And it turns out it was, anyway, I won't tell you. It kind of ruined a lot right there, so bummer. But that's the thing. You can know a lot about the mechanics of film, but what I see in Christian film, they don't want to let the beast out to play. They don't want to have fun with the medium itself. Like, take the time to have a few moments of no dialogue. You don't have to jump right in and start talking, and the dialogue is what tells you what the the conflict is. In a good film, you can tell from a look, a pause, something nonverbal that two characters have a tension in their relationship. You can tell that really well. The beginning of the movie, not Unbreakable, Bruce Willis, it's the M. Night Shyamalan movie. It's like all these movies I didn't prepare for, so The Sixth Sense. I'm sorry, no, this is Unbreakable. The beginning of Unbreakable, you see a guy on a train and he's really nervous and awkward, and you see him take his wedding ring and kind of put it in his pocket and start trying to hit on this girl, and the girl like, no, and he's like, oh yeah, I wasn't trying to flirt with you, kind of thing. So you got a little hint right there, but it wasn't overblown, it was real subtle. Then you see him and his wife later after he gets out of the hospital because there was a train crash, and they're holding hands, and the son's all like, putting their hands together, and he's all happy, and then he walks ahead a little bit, and as soon as he's ahead, you see them both let go. Just subtle things like that, and you're like, these guys have major marital problems. This is like, okay, I got the point, you've set it up, but you didn't have, a Christian film would have said, hi, we're having marital problems. The opening scene would have been a pastor's office, and they're having marital counseling. Why do that? Have fun with the art, have fun with the film. You have acting at your disposal, script writing, all sorts of things. And so I just think that is starting to correct itself a little bit, but that's been one of my biggest criticisms against Christian films. Because there are really cheesy, low-budget secular films that are actually pretty cool. They're like, okay, they didn't have any money to work with, but you can tell they're talented, so they did something with it. Not Sharknado, I'm talking about other low-budget films. So, just a little thought there. Okay, now, what about the world? C.S. Lewis, Chronicles of Narnia, I'm going to bring that up in a second, but the Chronicles of Narnia were so successful, and of course the movie was made, but I'm talking about the books, were so successful that there was this atheist author, he's still alive, Philip Pullman. The movie The Golden Compass, it was out almost as quick as it came into the theaters, but he wrote this trilogy. This was the first book in the trilogy, specifically because he hated C.S. Lewis. So here's what he says. When you look at what C.S. Lewis is saying, his message is so anti-life, so cruel, so unjust. The view that the Narnia books have for the material world is one of almost undisguised contempt. I want to emphasize the simple physical truth of things, the absolute primacy of the material life, materialism, rather than the spiritual or the afterlife. He's an atheist, he doesn't believe there is anything spiritual, and he basically, in other interviews, you piece it all together, he's ticked that Lewis was effective in promoting the Christian belief system through this really awesome story, and that bothered him. He was like, oh, I want to have one of our own as atheists, so that's why he wrote these books. And he's very vocal about how anti-religious he is. Why is it he even felt the need to go, I want to do something? Well, it's because he did a really good job. C.S. Lewis did a really good job as a writer. He was a literary expert, and he honed his craft and to the point where people couldn't just ignore him. Another way of looking at it is, I'm never going to get this done in 45 minutes, so let's just have fun. I'll pare it down later.
Well, I'm timing you for each segment, so.
Oh, good, thank you,
You better move
Go
on.
really fast. Satan bad, God good, let's go.
No, you can have it.
So the books were done at such a high quality level. This reminds me of Dostoevsky, who was a Christian. He was Orthodox Christian, so we feel a little bit distant from him, but he was the Christian, no question. And he would put good Christian content into his books. Well, when the Russian nation became the Soviet Union, they had a problem on their hands, because Russians are the worst nationalists you've ever. They just think that they're better because they're as racist as you get. We're Russian, we're better than everybody else because we're Russian. Fiercely nationalistic. So they always point to things like, you guys don't have authors like Dostoevsky and Tolstoy, and we're like, I don't know, Shakespeare. But that's how the conversations go when you're talking to a nationalistic Russian. So now you've got this nation that's atheist, but really prideful about their national heritage. What do they do with Dostoevsky? And there are a bunch of things written about Soviets and how they handle them, because they wanted to say, look what a great writer he is, but don't read him. Because if you read him, you're going to read all this good Christian apologetics. He actually argued for the truthfulness of Christianity in his books at times. So it was because Dostoevsky just like Lewis, did such a good job, they couldn't easily be ignored. And so the call to Christian filmmakers, and whatever it is you do, we do it with excellence. So we can't, the gospel has to be listened to because they need us around, whether functionally or just for entertainment purposes. So I think that's really cool. Now, getting into films, because those are books we're talking about, it's interesting that the best Christian films were not made by Christian studios. So we're going to talk about Amistad later, which I would throw in there too, but Narnia was done by Walden Media, which kind of Christian, but not really. They're not. That's not their stated purpose, even though it's Christian owned. It's not anymore, but he started it. And then, of course, Disney distributed it. So these aren't Christian companies that brought us one of the best Christian stories ever to film. They did a good job. I would have done a few things different maybe, but I thought, all in all three of the movies I liked. Thumbs up for me. The Passion, it's a Hollywood production. Mel Gibson, of course, is a Christian, Catholic Christian, but it was done with complete, he didn't care if the sound guy or the key grip were born again Christians. He just hired, like he did Braveheart, learned his craft in Braveheart and other movies that he wanted to put to the story of Jesus. I can only imagine maybe you could call it a Christian film, even though it's considered a large box office release. But the reason it was successful is, once again, that song is like transcendently awesome. Like, people were calling into secular country stations. If you saw the movie, or if you don't know the song, you were sleeping during that 15-year period. You remember, like, driving down the road? I mean, in the North, it's a much bigger deal to hear a Christian song on the radio. Like, it stands out. Like, what? And so I was just blown away. Why is isn't that the song I heard on the Christian station? And I listened to it, I'm like, yeah, that's the same song. They didn't edit it. And little by little, you start to realize that everybody was getting something. There's something about that song that just grabbed everybody, believers and unbelievers alike. Is because the song, I mean, obviously God did something very unique there. You can't always replicate those things, but it was done with excellence. And so the world couldn't ignore it. And so when it was translated into a movie, it attracted the best talent in Hollywood. So those are three examples. Truth, okay. So this is back to the beginning. Why did I start with truth? Okay. Philippians 4:8. Finally, brothers and sisters, whatever is true, whatever is noble, whatever is right, whatever is pure, whatever is lovely, whatever is admirable, if anything is excellent or praiseworthy, think about such things. Okay. I checked with our New Testament scholars to make sure that this wasn't an overstatement, and they said, no, that's usually when it's, I'll tell you what, but when I proposed my idea, and they said, yeah, in that case especially, it's going to be true. So, whatever is lovely. Well, don't tell me that I should stop, or that I can improve in this way. That's not pure and lovely and praiseworthy. And you start talking about all these categories that are more, kind of heartfelt. I went online and I typed in Philippians 4:8 greeting cards. So I got one. So pretty, isn't it? There's flowers, and I'm sorry I had to do that. Oh my gosh, I can't do that anymore. That was a non-gender specific voice. I was absolutely not making any reference to any gender issues or gender confusion. And I'm not making fun of people with a lisp. Okay, I'm going to get myself in trouble. I love this one. Whatever is lovely, think about such things. Okay, I know that you can, isolate each one of them. Nothing wrong with that. But okay, isn't that nice? Let's put that on our wall as Christians. There's a nice flowery one, the whole verse on it again, and add some little bits of water droplets, and it's just so pretty, isn't it? Okay. Anyway, I'm sorry. I'm making fun of it because what do they skip when they are going right for the flower petals and the fields and the, little? It's all very effeminate, very pastels. What are they skipping?
Art.
What's the first word in whatever is?
True.
Yeah. Whatever, and right, but yeah, you can't read it through all the cursive, right? So the point is this: if you think something is lovely, but that person doesn't think it's lovely, you're at an impasse. And we're at this situation right now in our culture. Well, love wins out, the mantra of the left. And by love, what do you mean by love? Oh, it's just, you just accept and embrace people's life who they are. They start defining it in ways that are untrue. The problem with the rest of those words, especially in our English language, maybe not so much back then, but it was true in Greek as well. There's some subjectivity in what is lovely. Beauty is in the eye of the beholder, right? You've always heard that. People can argue about, tell me, just come to film school and listen to, we watch a movie and then we argue about it for 2 hours. It's great. And you're like, what? You saw what in that film? And you start, hey, you're full of it, you don't know what you're talking about. And people get pretty passionate when they start critiquing a piece of art. It's because there's a lot of subjectivity. That's why Paul says, start with what is true. And if it's true, it will be lovely and pure, and admirable and praiseworthy and all these things. So that's why I just cringe. I was in sales for 13 years, and the power of positive thinking, and just that adjective positive always rubbed me the wrong way. Because when the Holy Spirit convicts you, does that feel positive? To be told that, no, you're not supposed to live like that, or no, stop being so negative. Positive and negative have almost no meaning anymore because it's completely subjective, depending on how the person, who's hearing it, or how they're feeling at that moment. Which is why it's so important to say, like the power of truthful thinking is always should be, instead of the power of positive thinking. I want to say that too, to begin with, so that as we're evaluating, that's a really beautiful acting performance, or that's a beautiful music score, or that's just whatever you're going to admire about the film. That's only talking about one aspect of it. Is what they're saying true is the most important thing. So now I'm going to use a different slide because they're kind of small. So I'm going to go through some movies now. I chose not to do clips for a few reasons, but these are going to be some stills, hopefully, if you've seen the movies, how you were feeling, what you were thinking during these scenes. I hope come back to you. The first one is it's my top movie, if not the top 3. Forrest Gump is just by far, it's in a league of its own in terms of technical execution, inspiration, what it's talking about really important things. It communicates to a wide range of an audience, and can't do that well in the theaters if it doesn't. All those reasons, it's got to be up on everyone's top 5 list. And I think it's pretty much accepted as such. So this scene here, I'm just going to pick out a couple of things to highlight 2 of the characters. This is Jenny. If you remember in the movie, that's the house she grew up in, and without showing anything, this tells you why you can be classy and still deal with really, really difficult issues. Her dad was molesting her and her sister, but they never show anything. You don't even see the dad. You hear him screaming, "Jenny, Jenny," and he starts coming out, and when she was a little girl. And this is the scene when she comes back. By this time, she had just wasted her life in the sex revolution. She was still making bad choices here, but so she comes, and they're on a walk, and she sees the house where she grew up, which is abandoned now, as you can see. And so she starts throwing rocks at it. Forrest is back there. He doesn't know what to do. If you remember Forrest, he's slow, a little slow in the head, but he's simplistic, straight to the point. He sees things let me just deal with them simply. He doesn't let them get complicated. And so you see her, he doesn't know what's going on. She's obviously rageful at what had happened, and you hear her saying a bunch of things as she's throwing the rocks. Like, how could you, or you, just little mumbles, and it's a powerful, powerful scene. Then she collapses, cries. He walks up. He doesn't know what to do because he doesn't even understand what molesting is. Still doesn't know. And he sits down, and the voiceover says, you guys remember that? His next line is the voiceover. He doesn't say it to her. He goes, I guess sometimes there just aren't enough rocks. And it's like, no matter what we try to do to correct what something we've done or something someone's done against us, it's never going to be enough. You can rage, you can try to get even, all of that. I mean, it was just a beautiful moment, and I hate this word that's overused a lot, but I'll use it here. It was sublime. It wasn't in your face, preachy, just, I guess sometimes there aren't enough rocks. Next scene, next person in the film, Lieutenant Dan. He's an awesome person. He took this role and he did good things for people. I mean, awesome. So he's Lieutenant Dan, very prideful about his family history. A person in his family has died in every American war. And he was like, okay, it's my turn. This is my turn to die in an American war. That was his attitude going into it. He believed in destiny. Jenny felt like the world was out of control, and you can even say Mama always said life is like a box of chocolates, meaning it's not predestined. It's not, it's complete randomness. Jenny would say the same thing, and the randomness produces evil in her eyes. Obviously, it was evil what her dad did. Lieutenant Dan's the exact opposite. It's all written, every single thing, like in a Greek god sense of the word. And he was destined to fight and die in an American war, but he didn't. He got shot in the legs and lost both of his legs, and he was mad that because he would have died in the battlefield, but Forrest Gump saved him. Remember, he saved like a dozen people. He kept running back and grabbing people because he was looking for Bubba, and that's my bad. But he was trying to find his best friend, but he didn't find him until the last one, and he ended up dying. So, all these spoilers. I should have spoiler alert on the opening slide, probably. Spoiler alert, and I'm really sorry. So he saves Dan's life, and Dan's mad. Dan is mad because he said, I needed to die. That was my destiny. You robbed me of my destiny. And so he becomes a drunkard, a leech off of the state at the VA, lives just a life of from bottle to bottle, pleasure to pleasure, whatever he can, and just angry all the time. Ultimately ends up becoming friends again with Forrest in the private sector, and they start a business, the shrimp boat, the Bubba Gump Shrimp Company, and they become successful. But before they can become successful, they're just talking in the boat about God. And, they can't find any shrimp. They're not being successful, and he's like, "Why don't you pray to this God of yours, and we can get some shrimp?" And then the storm starts coming. Do you remember that scene where the hurricane starts? And he says, "It's funny." Forrest says, "It's funny he mentioned God, because right then God showed up, and there was this hurricane scene, and they're out there. He's up at the top in the crow's nest, and they refuse to come back in because Lieutenant Dan was mad. He's up there screaming at God. This right there is him, like he's pointing at God in an accusatory way. This is you and me. This is a showdown. Come on, bring it. That all you got? I mean, he is angry. And Forrest is even saying that he's like, he was angry. I don't know what he was angry about, but he was angry. That was the most sincere prayer. One of the most sincere prayers I've ever seen in film. That's what God wants. Because if that's what's in our heart, don't come to him with these flowery, platitudes. He knows what's really in our hearts. Or Larry Crabb, would say, don't be angry at God so that, that's not your goal, but acknowledge if you are angry with him, say it. That's what God brought Job to the point of Job saying, yeah, God, what the heck? And then God said, okay, there, now you've said what's really in your heart. Let me school you. And then he goes through his whole, are you God? Are you, all the things, and puts Job back in his rightful place, not in any kind of mean way, but just, I'm God, which means I'm also loving, and you can trust me, but you can't question me, because you're just man. That's Job being played out on film right here. So he has a prayer, screaming, and they're the only shrimp boat that survives the hurricane, because the hurricane hit the shore so hard that everybody that went into shore, their boats got turned over and destroyed, so they were set back by months. They're the only boat. And he says from then on, shrimping was easy. And so they become like billionaires overnight because they're the only ones that could buy shrimp. So at one point in the film, you can't really see there, that's Lieutenant Dan. Remember, he has no legs. He's just swimming to enjoy their new life. And there's this beautiful cloud in the back with the sun. I think it was the sunset. And at that point, he says, Lieutenant Dan never said so, but I think he finally made his peace with God. And he just goes off, and at the last scene of the movie, he is actually walking on titanium legs, because he's so rich now, he's able to get the best prosthetics, marrying an Oriental girl. This is sometimes underappreciated. Remember, he was shot in Vietnam, and a lot of Vietnam vets were very racist against any. That girl looks like she's probably Korean, actually, but because the Vietnamese are Asian, there was this they would use some colorful words to talk about anybody from Asia, Japan, Korea, Vietnam, China. So that shows you he had a complete change of heart and change of life. This is a redemption story. With Jenny, there's some redemption there. They do get married, and she dies peacefully, but she is a life that burns out. She does the drugs, the sex, the rock and roll, everything in the 60s and 70s. And the movie doesn't say it. There's a lot written on it, actually. What did she die of? It was probably AIDS. They don't say it, and there's people saying yeah, no or yes or whatever, but it fits the pattern of the movie completely, that it was AIDS that she had. But that was the consequence of the drug and the sex culture she was in. So with Lieutenant Dan, you have a life of redemption, even through extraordinarily hard circumstances. And with Jenny, you have just not the willingness to turn the tables or turn the tide. Great example. You also, this is one of the other themes of whether God's in control or we're just kind of floating around. So the feather at the beginning and at the end of the movie is not an accident. It's not just to try some special effects, which it was pretty amazing how they did that back for 1992 or 4. The feather at the opening and the closing scene is the bookends that sandwiches the whole story. It's floating around, and the director said this is exactly what he's going for. It was appearingly random. It's just floating around, and the car will drive by and it'll blow back up again. Remember that prologue? This is why I never skip credits either, especially opening credits. There are stories going on that set up the movie if you fast forward through those things. So don't ever do that. So at the end of the movie, the feather goes away. And what he was saying with that is what seems random is actually purposeful on God's end. He was in control. Even though the wind was randomly blowing it around, God had intended for these things to happen to Forrest and to all these people. He is in control even when it seems like it's radically out of control. And when he's at the graveside, he's talking to Jenny. She's dead, but he's talking to her at the graveside. And he says, I don't know who's right. Is Lieutenant Dan right, or is my mom right? He says, I think it's both. And in a simplistic way, he's trying to say, God can be in control and people can be free. That's the balance. And it's not just for Christians to have to figure out the whole determinism versus freedom question, but that movie, that's basically the movie. Problem of evil and determinism versus free will. And it's done just better than any Christian piece of art or sermon, frankly, that I've seen on those two things, because it just grabs you and takes you in. Another movie though, do not see this movie. It's horrible. I hate everything about it. But I didn't know I hated it because it came out when I was in film school, and it was like everyone said, "Can I go see a Sam Mendes movie?" It was American Beauty, and they messed up beyond belief. But in that movie, it had a very cynical. So Forrest Gump examined what was good and bad about America, and basically was saying there's beauty here, there's goodness, God's in control, even through the roughest period in our nation's history, the 60s and 70s. American Beauty was everything you think is beautiful, it's just garbage. It's, and the best you can do is find an artist who will take that garbage that you conservative Americans, they didn't talk about Christianity that much, but we artists are the only ones that can make any sense of it. So what this scene is, she was asking, this is the next door neighbor, kind of a crush going on, why he took, this is a garbage bag, and why he took a video of a garbage bag blowing around. Like, you're weird. And he says, no, I do that because, and he explains the whole, this is someone's garbage, meaning that society, the Western culture has delivered garbage, and there's this random thing of wind, there's no purpose behind it, nothing. But me as an artist, I'm able to make something beautiful out of it. That's why we're better than all the people that gave us this garbage bag. That's his message.
Smug snobbery.
Very smug. And the whole movie is smug, in the same tone. But that was the telling part of the movie. I'll go for the feather, not the garbage bag, just as far as analogies and what is true. Okay, Amistad. Who has not seen Amistad?
We're going to.
You're going to? Okay. Dude, you would love it. Okay, so Amistad does for the slave trade and the lead up to the Civil War the same thing that Schindler's List does to the Holocaust. So he deals with it bluntly. This is what happened. I'm not going to sugarcoat it. But this is important that everybody remembers all of these things. So here you have Steven Spielberg, who is Jewish by ethnicity, not a believing Jew. There's no evidence at all that he practices Judaism. Extraordinarily liberal in his politics. He gives millions and millions and millions of dollars to liberal causes and candidates. I mean, it's as liberal as they come in terms of political. But then he makes a movie like this. First of all, Schindler's List and all the E.T. and all these great movies that we all love. But this movie here was unique because the gospel that was in it. So it's about Sinke, he's the main character. He, along with a bunch of other people from his home nation, get kidnapped. And they take you through the whole, like, from being a free tribesman to being kidnapped by a rival tribe and then get sold into the slave traders who were all black, to then the slave traders from Spain, and then finally over to the U.S., Cuba actually, and then to the U.S. So they recount the entire story and throughout the movie. But most of the movie takes place in the courtroom. And it's an argument that's based on this. Natural law is what we found our country on. The natural law says, and he quotes the Declaration, that all men are created equal, and if anybody, and they have inalienable rights, which means no one can take them away from you. You can pretend that people don't have it, but you're just pretending. People have these rights, they're inalienable. That life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, which has baked into it, if someone tries to take that away from you, you have the moral right to fight back. And that's what these guys did, is they ultimately took, when the ship was going from Cuba to the mainland, they were able to break free and they killed everyone but 2 people, the slave traders, and they were able to take over the boat. But ultimately the U.S. Navy caught them, and that's how they got into the court. So that's the battle that's going on in court. We stand on this as America. These guys were living out exactly what we say we believe. Why are we trying them? Or, if you, slave traders, if you slave traders are correct that these are property, because it was a legal battle about property, was the court case. It was theft. They're saying, how do you try property for murder? So you want to try this Sinke both for murder and you want to give them as property back to these slave traders. You can't have it both ways. Which one is it? And it's a beautiful tension in the movie. So that's the basic argument of the legal case that they make. But what happens is, somewhere in the beginning of the movie, Quakers, so Spielberg, again, a Jew who's secular, who's very liberal, he puts Quakers in there. And I was like, oh gosh, here it comes. He's going to make them out to be closet racists and all that. The Quakers at the beginning are singing Amazing Grace, great song about abolitionism. They give him a Bible, one of the, not the main character. This is the main character, Sinke. This is another guy who, at the beginning, both of them are obviously rageful, murderous, I would say murderous, rageful, and they're willing to kill because of what has been done to them. So they're both just like very, very angry and eating them up because of this anger. He gets the Bible, and little by little through the movie, you see him in the background, like the main action's happening here, and in the background you see him kind of leafing through the Bible, looking at the pictures, because it's in English, he doesn't understand it, but there are a lot of pictures in it. And little by little, he's becoming more and more and more calm. And he's starting to show more and more restraint in these fruits of the Spirit, we would call them. So in this scene here, he's over there reading the Bible, and Sinke says across the cell, hey, they're not looking, you don't need to pretend like you're reading their book, you know. I know you're just doing that to try and make them like you better so we can get off, but they're not watching. He goes, no, I'm not doing this to impress anybody, or I'm starting to understand it, I think. So come over here, I want to share it with you. And he sits there and he says, well, first of all, their people are like us. They've suffered. And he shows the Jews in Egypt. And he goes through the Old Testament saying, you know, all that they went through. He said, but then something changed. This child was born, and you see Jesus. And they're like, well, who was he? And he says, I don't know. But everywhere he went, the sun followed him because of the drawings with the leg behind his head. And here he is healing people. Here he is standing up for the weak. It's the scene of him, you know, cast the first stone with the woman. He's going through the life and ministry of Jesus. And he says, but then something happened. I don't know what. But they got mad at him. And they tried him. And they ultimately, they said, well, what did he do? He says, well, what did he do wrong? He says, nothing. And he says, well, he must have done something wrong. And he says, why? What did we do? We're on trial here. Injustice happens. It was awesome, just the whole case. And then he says, yeah, so whatever he did, it was serious enough that they put him to death. But that's not the end of the story. He turns the page and he's like, he rose again. He appeared to his followers. And here he is going up into heaven. And this is where we're going to go when they kill us, because he thought they were all going to be executed. And it's just, I mean, is that like the best gospel? And then, now, to drive it home, so they're really talking about the cross, and while he's giving him the story, the Catholic priest who is the judge that they thought was going to just do what he was told to do, which was to convict them, because of what the president wanted him to do, but he knew that justice demanded these guys get let go. This Catholic is in church as he's telling this gospel story, and you see him praying, you can't tell what he's saying, but he's praying, and when he says they hung him on this busime, he calls it in their language, you see him do the Catholic cross, and they're tying it all together, like, okay, if you guys believe this, you should want these people to be free. It was the abolitionist argument done on film. It was beautiful. And then to drive it home, the very next scene is they're walking to the courthouse. It's next to a shipyard, and you look, and there's a ship coming in with the sails down, and it has 3 masts that have a vertical and cross beams. And the angle, this guy here looks up, and the angle is, it's Calvary, just slowly moving across. And you see him like hold his Bible, and they go in, and that's when they get the verdict of not guilty, and they're set free. I mean, it was just, Spielberg did a masterful job because he's so good at what he does. He's honed his craft beyond, I think, probably any filmmaker. He can just, in his sleep, make films, and they're going to be great. So, the gospel effectively communicated. Okay, now not all messages are good or true, because whatever is true is the most important, right? The Matrix, good film in many ways. Obviously, it broke a lot of barriers technologically. The whole, jump and kick and that little special effect move that they do, that's pretty commonplace now. Even the NFL uses it for replay. That was invented and trademarked by these guys, or not copyrighted. It's intellectual property. Patent, yeah, that's it. So they broke a lot of barriers in film. It was really neat to see what they did. But here's the thing. Okay, I have to keep asking. Who has not seen The Matrix? Your parents must love you, because you haven't seen a lot of these. So The Matrix, at the beginning, a lot of Christians were celebrating it, saying, this is a Christian message. And they would point to things like this. The ship was called the Nebuchadnezzar. The main heroine, I guess you call her, the main female lead, her name was Trinity. And the main character, his name's Neo, is a Christ figure. Now, a Christ figure is, literature has this all the way through, ever since Jesus. And a Christ figure is just a literary device which focuses on somebody sacrificing themselves so that others can live. And it usually it only pretty much talks about the sacrifice, not the resurrection. So when they say Christ figure, they're just meaning like you lay your life down for others. So that's obviously who Neo is. In the first movie, he rises again, right? He gets shot, he's killed, and then he rises again. Very obviously Christ's imagery. But by the third movie, they're really driving it home. As he's sacrificing himself for everybody, that's the scene in The Matrix when he finally dies at the end to blow up Agent Smith and to kill that program or delete that program. It's the cross. So they're not being coy at all. They're trying to say, yeah, we're using this literary device called the Christ figure. But the beliefs, the world that they say, the world as it is, as they say, is a Buddhist worldview. It's a Buddhist system, not Christian at all. In Buddhism, the basic tenets of Buddhism say that this world is actually an illusion. It's not real. The Matrix, it's not real. It's an illusion. The only way to escape it and get to the real is to know that and to essentially give in to that. And then when you die that last time in Buddhism, you'll awaken in nirvana, which is non-being. It's not heaven, it's non-being. For them, it's you wake up into the real world, which is not exciting. It's very ugly, but at least it's real, is the point. At least it's real. That's Buddhism 101. And if you look at the movie again in that light, you start to see a lot of areas where they're actually undermining Christianity majorly. They're very, 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 very anti-conservative, anti-Christian. When this movie was made, the two directors are brothers. They were men. They're now both women. At least they think they are. I forget Lana, and I can't remember what the other one, but the Wachowski brothers are now the Wachowski sisters. And
Both
both of them now. Because you know Lana was
Yeah,
the first
I knew
one
Lana.
shortly after this, but yeah, they both
That was
are.
why they had the big delay. in
Yeah.
One,
Exactly.
because he was transitioning, and they said, and the studio was saying, no, there's no truth to that, that's nonsense.
And then they come out with their new identity.
Yeah, and it shows up as a woman at the.
Plus the whole idea that this movie is kind of like you're living in a simulation. We talked about that recently, Elon Musk and others are promoting that idea as well out there, that, we're all just AI kind of simulations.
He said like 80%, he was 80% sure. They
Yeah,
were
he's
living in the
interesting.
Matrix.
He says some things that are like, yeah, that's pretty insightful. Other things you're like, yeah, you've been watching sci-fi too much. Now, do you see, as we're talking about this, how important substance dualism versus holomorphism becomes? Because substance dualism lays the foundation for someone to say we're software, stuck inside of a simulation, because they have this mind-body separation, two different substances. If you're a holomorphist, there's no matrix even possible. I mean, you can trick your senses, but that's different than surviving the body or being transferable. Like in the Matrix, if you remember in the second and the third one, Agent Smith his software essentially gets uploaded to one of the humans, one of the resistance fighters, and he becomes a bad guy and ends up ruining everything at the end. Remember that? That's substance dualism, that your soul or your mind is this thing that's software that can be removed or added at will. Star Wars, okay? Look, if you're not at least somewhat in love with Star Wars, I'm going to check your, citizen status. It's everyone knows Star Wars, and I find very few people who haven't seen it, even if they don't love it. But I mean, it's obviously made its mark on American culture, Western culture. It's huge. It doesn't get much bigger than the Star Wars franchise. But Star Wars is pantheism in its worldview and its religion. What pantheism means that everything is part of God, sort of like the life force. The next one, this is going to be nuanced, because the next one we're going to talk about is another kind of ism which sounds a lot like it. So pantheism, that God is, or the force is between, he's explained to him here, between the rock and you, and yes, even the ship and the shore, and he then moves the X-Wing fighter. So it's pantheism 101. I'll say both with the Matrix and with this, I don't think it follows that Christians shouldn't see them. That they still have, like, he drew a lot, Star Wars, Lucas, on Greek mythology, quite a bit, and the old heroes of Ulysses and all those battles, and there's still a sense of good and evil, at least in the old ones. And the new ones are trying to even do away with that distinction. But he still has evil being conquered by good. So you can still point to it and draw some things out of it. And there's nothing objectionable in the Star Wars movies, so that makes them good as well. But you have to be eyes wide open when you're watching movies, especially things like Star Wars, Pocahontas, Lion King. I mean, these are not teaching anything close to reality. And it can be erosive to believers' belief system. Now this one is the next ism. I hated this movie. Like, visually it was amazing. This is really cool, seeing tall Smurfs flying ships. But it was like,
It seemed so overt from the beginning about the military is evil, right?
Yep.
There was nothing nuanced about it. It's just, if you're military, then you're flat out evil.
it's very preachy.
Very,
Yeah, military and capitalist, because
Yes.
it was the company trying to exploit nature. It was clear. It basically, they took the script of Dancing with Wolves and they put it on another planet, and that's Avatar.
And they got third graders to write the dialogue.
That's terrible.
Because the dialogue was just, that is the worst dialogue.
I think it was because he was saying, I don't care, I want to preach something. And Cameron is very, very preachy. If you ever watch his interviews, he's so cocky, he's so sure of himself, he just looks down on everyone who doesn't believe the way he does. He's awful in that. And so I think he was like, look, I'm better than everybody, I'm gonna write what I wanna write, and they're gonna come see my movies. And they did. This was number one until, that's one reason I was rooting so hard for Avengers Endgame. I wanted Avatar off the number one list. And so we won, yay, that's good. So Avatar, you have panentheism. Now this is slightly different than pantheism. Well, it's actually really different, but it sounds so close. So here, the best way to say it is, the universe is the body. So this is sort of like substance dualism. The substance of the universe is the body, and the substance of God's spirit is the soul that animates the universe. So it's like God is not using, but we're like his liver, or Pangea. Is that what they call it, Pangea? Or no, it was Pandora.
Pandora. It was something Pangea.
Pandora was some other part of God's body, and they illustrate that in the movie with the tree. They're getting this life force stuff from this tree, but the tree of souls was actually alive. It was the life. It was like they were cutting off, they were tapping into somebody's vein and stealing their blood, is how they depicted them. I forget the name of the ore that they were extracting from this planet.
Unobtainium.
Unobtainium. That's original too, yeah. It does sound like it was written by a third grader there. So unobtainium was them taking a resource out of the body of this overall organism called the universe. And this planet, it was this tree. That's panentheism. So I think it's out of, in, God. So God is both out and in the universe, but not in a Christian sense of like involved. I mean in as in like in.
Materially a part of it.
Yeah, I mean his substance, the God substance and the material substance are the dualistic nature of all of physical reality. So obviously not compatible with Christianity, apart from all the anti-military, anti-capitalism. Just the way it's all set up, it's just not true. But here's the thing.
Wayne Dyer.
Yeah.
Is that.
And yeah, Christians will sometimes see things like. So you have the first one, the Matrix teaching Buddhism, and people go by the millions to go see it. Second one, Star Wars, of course, the hundreds and hundreds of millions. They go to see that, and they're learning pantheism. And then obviously a lot of people went to see this because it made a lot of money worldwide. And all three of them are extraordinarily preachy. So here's the thing. There are not enough non-believers to account for the ticket sales for these three movies. Christians went in large number. I saw all three of them. Christians support this stuff. Why is it that people who disagree with what they're preaching are willing to give over, anywhere from $5 to $15, right, for a ticket? It's because they're really good at making movies. It's the same thing on the flip side as what I was saying about Dostoevsky and C.S. Lewis, and to a lesser degree Tolkien. Why is it that people will go see Lord of the Rings when it's in general a Christian worldview, even though it's not an allegory? Because it's really good. Great literature, great films, not made by Christians at all. Peter Jackson, I don't even think is aware of the Christian undertones, at least. But he made a great movie, and people went to go see it by the hundreds of millions, including Christians in this case. So that's another encouragement for us as Christians. If we put the quality into what we do, we can't forever be ignored. They have to listen eventually. If enough of us are doing as good a job as we can, and those are examples of that. Beauty. So, I already said that. Beauty in the cinema, we already talked about starting with truth. So, getting back to teleology, I thought it'd be good to, what's the scripture? The moral argument. Okay, go back to what we learned in I Don't Have Enough Faith to Be an Atheist. This is one of the arguments for God's existence. The moral argument. Okay, so if objective morals exist, I'm tweaking this from what's in the book, then humans have natures. Remember that conversation about God's not the standard of morality, because no one can be God, but the perfect human, we're called to be perfect humans, meaning there's a nature, there's a goal or a telos, as it's the Greek term telos. We have to be perfect humans, otherwise we don't get into heaven. None of us are. That's why Jesus was the perfect human. If we were all called to be God, then we would say Jesus in his human nature also became God, which is heresy. So being a perfect human is what we're called to be. So, but that's anchored in our natures, which are created by God. So, if objective morals exist, then humans have natures. Objective morals do exist, therefore humans have natures. If human natures exist, then God exists. And that's because natures are by definition not physical, they're metaphysical. So whatever has created these and put them in the world, we have natures, trees have natures, whatever that is can't be in the world. It has to transcend the world. And there's a high degree of purposefulness or design in all the natures and how they work together. You're starting to describe God, the initial cause of all these natures. So that's not a leap there, that's the argument. So if human natures exist and God exists, therefore God exists. So that's the moral argument that natural law tries to make, and I think does so very successfully. Look at the similarities between that and the aesthetic argument, or the argument from beauty. If objective beauty exists, not just, that's your word, that's, you think it's beautiful, he doesn't, she doesn't. If it's actually objective, then natures exist. I'll stop there. Why? Why is it that natures have to exist if beauty is objective?
Because if it's objective, then there must be some standard by which you can measure it, and so for that to be templated out, that means there's a nature that controls that.
That work of art is closer to the nature it's trying to represent than that work of art. Exactly. There's got to be a goal. There's I won't say form because that's getting into Platonism. There's some objective thing that is the good that these artists are trying to represent. And so even Picasso, who doesn't represent at all reality, at least visually, but he is tapping into something that is beautiful objectively, which is self-expression. So being able to be sincere and express yourself, that's a good. That's what God gave us the ability to do. So even someone that's kind of way out there visually like Picasso, he's still tapping into objective beauty. Okay, so if objective beauty exists, the natures exist, or teloses, or goals, or targets. Objective beauty does exist, therefore natures exist. If natures exist, therefore God exists. So what's frustrating, I wish I would have known this stuff in the 90s. The arguments that we would get into in class, and especially after class, when the teacher wasn't there to calm us down, man, people would just yell at each other because if they disagree with your take on whether a good film was good or whether that actor was good or whatever thing you're trying to evaluate, they would get angry. They would be like, that's just because you're dumb, or you're obviously not artistic. I'm artistic because I'm an actor and I know better than you, or I'm more artsy-fartsy than you, so I know better. They would start name calling people. It was ugly. I wish I would have been able to say this back then.
You see the scene from The Doors?
I have not seen The Doors, no.
Oh, you haven't seen The Doors? There's a scene where Jim Morrison is arguing with another film student, and they're sitting there arguing about art and a particular work that says, and the guy says, your problem is that you need your art spoon-fed to you. And it's, he's like, well, what's wrong? It's still art. And the whole argument is everything you're just talking about right here.
Whether or not it's subjective. Or...
Yeah, and they're actually talking about a piece that one of them made for the art class that they were in at the Los Angeles Film School.
Yep. That's awesome, and that even, it's a good example too, someone like Jim Morrison or Oliver Stone that's representing Jim Morrison, it has to be true that what would the Academy Awards even mean if there wasn't objectivity and beauty? Like when they say you're the best actor, what does that mean? If there isn't a goal, like somebody is acting like an historical figure, okay, there's a real, Gary Oldman is playing Churchill, and he nails it. He gets best actor. I don't know if he did, but he deserves it, man. That was awesome.
He did, and they didn't want to.
They didn't?
No,
because he's too conservative. Yeah.
They didn't want to.
But he nailed it. He just and Glenn Close, I think it was, that played Margaret Thatcher. Was it Glenn Close? Or
No, that was was it? No, it was
it was what's her name that was in Devil Wears Prada. I can't remember her name now.
yeah,
Meryl Streep.
Meryl Streep.
Yeah.
She nailed. If you haven't seen that, it's a really good movie. It's a little cynical about Margaret Thatcher, but it doesn't get too bad. So that would be an example of you nailed that goal of acting like this person that's real. But so that's obvious. But how do you give that award to best film score? What goal is there? Well, there's something called beauty in music, and then how that music accentuates or adds to the story. These are goals. You nailed it better than that one, so we're giving you the award. Their whole project of Hollywood crumbles if objective morals don't exist. Objective beauty doesn't exist. And of course the morals, how they all go off on their morality when they're giving their acceptance speeches. So in the irony of the Academy Awards is that they deny objective morals and objective beauty while they make the whole world hold the both of them for that evening. It's so hypocritical. And I used to talk about geeking out, and this is my last slide, so we can do Q&A afterwards. You know how people for March Madness have their brackets? I used to download all of the films that were up for all the various awards, and I would go through and I would pick my winners. I didn't do every category like best, some technical thing, but I made sure it was best picture, best director, best actor, and best actress, and maybe soundtrack. I don't know. So the big 4 or 5. And I seriously would stay up until 1 in the morning with, I missed that one, or I'd yell at the TV because, well, you guys smoking crack? What are you talking about? That's how into it I am or was back then. So right around the time of the movie Philadelphia, you remember that with Tom Hanks, and where they first started to get preachy about the LGBT agenda, I was like, okay, I didn't like that, but let's wait till next year. Then it started happening more, and so the liberal politics, not just the LGBT stuff, but all sorts of liberal. And then of course 9/11 happened. And you had all the Michael Moore started winning things. He'd go off. I just can't watch him anymore, and that hurts me not to watch something that I really enjoyed that much. But they're dead to me. They reject everything that gives them legitimacy as an art and as an industry, and so I don't have time to watch a bunch of kindergartners trying to do calculus, which is basically what it boils down to. So that's I'm like a homeless art appreciator. So
Feel different about the indie movies?
Oh, what?
Indie movies, like the small film stuff.
I evaluate them the same way. There are a lot of good indie movies. I go through phases where I'll look at rent foreign films. There's a director, I can't remember his last name, but his first name is Nimrod, a very biblical name. And he's Czechoslovakian, and he's got some movies that are odd but good, interesting. I watch those, and if I'm in the right mood, there's nothing better than a good silent movie. It's really, really cool, but I have to be in the right mood for those. So it doesn't matter to me what country or genre or whatever. I've even watched, when I was dating Jenny, she was really into Anne of Green Gables. You can tell that about her. She loved Anne of Green Gables, emulated her everything, and that kind of stuff nauseates me, right? But I was so in love, and I wanted to understand this girl I was seriously dating by then. So I went to the library and I rented the entire series. And I sat down, that was my first time binge watching any particular series. And I sat down and watched it, and I watched all, 6 hours worth? I can't, the original. Have you seen it? I don't know, I'm looking at you like you've actually seen it.
No, I've not seen the whole series,
Okay.
sorry.
And I remember watching the whole thing, and I was like, all right, this is good. I was rooting for her to get together with Gilbert Grape, not Gilbert Grape, but Gilbert Blythe, and it was I was getting into it. It's good writing, it's good acting. And then I started finding myself I did Joy Luck Club. Yeah, I liked it. Jenny makes me watch things like, Glen Ear and Pride and Prejudice, and I kick and scream, but I sit down, I watch it, and the boys will usually sit down kicking and screaming too. And 15 minutes into it, it's over, okay, tell me more. I like a lot of different types of movies, genres. So you asked that question, yeah, or who asked it about the indies? That you-
Yeah.
Depends on the indie. A lot, if they're indie because they're just, they haven't been discovered yet, that's usually better than if they're indie because they're so like messed up in their thinking that no studio is gonna pay them money to put that on film. Depends why they're indie.
Where does that name come from? What's it?
Independent.
Oh.
Yeah, it just means not from a studio, so they kind of,
Yeah, there's indie bands
yeah.
and stuff, they're independent, they're not signed by record labels.
What do you think about some of this, like, Netflix originals and Hulu originals and, you know, Amazon Prime originals?
Same
Yeah.
thing, some of them are great, some are really good, like
I
Stranger
find that
Things.
most of the stuff that's like originals, like on Netflix or Prime, they're all like NR, not rated, and guaranteed it's just filled with like bad language. and
Depends on
nudity
the,
and-
because like, Series of Unfortunate Events.
That's an
isn't-
exception, right?
Right.
So you got that one,
That
which
was
was done
pretty good.
really well.
I loved it. Oh,
I
man.
was like-
I've read 4 of them and they're short, so it's not impressive.
It was like embarrassingly good because
It was.
the kids thing, I'm not supposed to be loving this.
Well, yeah, I recommend that one a
And
lot.
then,
We loved it as a family, we sat and
What's
watched
his
it.
name, what's
Jenny
his name was
hated it though.
incredible,
Neil Patrick Harris.
Neil Patrick Harris. He was,
Yeah.
he
Yeah.
was amazing.
Doogie Howser.
Yeah, she's always mad at the transgender character. You ever notice the guy that's always wearing the dress in the
Mhm.
show?
Well, you know what the character's name is?
No.
Person of indeterminate gender.
Yeah.
That's, you look at the credits, that's.
Yeah, I gotta think of more like Pat from Saturday Night Live.
Yeah.
I don't know, he looked like he kept experimenting more and more instead.
Well, you know, the producer, the executive producer is Neil Patrick Harris,
yeah.
and he is gay,
Yeah.
and he is somewhat of an activist. But it wasn't a part of the storyline, really. They played it straight to the script. But that's an example, and there are a few others, but I can't think of them right now. But you're right, you know, Stranger Things got worse with the language as time went on, and they had that unfortunate, like, you guys had to do it, didn't you? They had to put a gay character in the last season. Very subtle, very just, I'm like, come on, guys, like in Endgame with that
Yeah.
support group, I'm like, it had nothing, that contributed 0 to the story.
Yeah.
And yet you had to do it. Couldn't stop yourselves.
And that's like the biggest rule of filmmaking, isn't it?
Unspoken, yeah, I mean,
Check it, don't, you know, when they edit it, they edit out everything that doesn't further the story.
well, the art, yeah,
Yeah.
but filmmaking is a business and it's an agenda thing as well. So, if you ever want, I think there is swearing in it, so and they're making fun of these people. So they show these people. So like Heather Graham plays a very naive but sexually loose person who will do whatever she can to get cast in a movie. And Steve Martin plays a totally, not immoral, he just doesn't care, doesn't even know what morals
Which movie is
are.
this?
It's called
Are you talking about
Bowfinger, yeah.
It's one of the funniest
I
movies I've
laugh
ever seen in my
so hard
life.
because it makes fun of Hollywood and how her character is, yeah, I'll sleep with anything, yeah, right up to the top, and she has 0 scruples, totally and remember how Steve Martin, she's like, she sleeps with the next person in line, and he sort of gets upset because he was sleeping with her before, and so he goes up and goes, hey, I heard you sleeping with Joe now. She says, yeah, so? He goes, I never thought about it like that. Okay, so we're still on for tonight? Okay, good. And it was just like this, like, totally amoral, he's making, it's obviously they're making fun of him and her and everybody. And it's just showing you just how vacuous the Hollywood filmmaking process is. These people are like the scourge of society morally. And they point it out. And they're like, and is it even that worth it when you're done with some of these films? No, it's not.
Yeah,
So.
they make, Steve Martin's got a couple films that makes fun of that part of the country.
He is an
LA
unbeliever in
Story.
LA Story, but he used to, I think he was a master's or he studied philosophy. And so he's a deep thinker, and it's kind of like, sort of like Monty Python, you know, where these guys, they're cynical about a lot of things, and many of them they're correct about. But they don't have an answer, and their answers that they propose are worse than.
The LA Story was.
It was very cynical, but it had its moments too. Like he recorded the weather because the weather never changes in LA, and the one time he records it so he can skip work, it rains, and he's on TV saying, "Hey, sunshine," and
Pouring down rain and just fall asleep
Yeah.
and it's shot.
so. Yeah, I haven't seen that one in a long time, but anyway, yeah, I don't remember how we got on that, but just, oh, you were talking about Netflix, there might be a few others, but you are right, in Netflix and Amazon, that they just, oh, I would say Lost in Space was good. There wasn't
Yeah.
any
So we
swearing?
started it, no, we
It's
started it,
boring.
we didn't go through it all.
It's
Noah-
really-
Noah did the whole thing and loved it. Oh, is it Lost in Space, the movie, or?
This
is
is-
that series?
this is the series.
Yeah,
It's-
Noah did it, he said he really liked how it ended.
I loved it.
It was very
Well, tell me
rewarding,
anything about it, 'cause we're
but
still
I
gonna
would
catch
say
up
it
on
like
it.
drags on in several of the, but they have like, what, 10 episodes
Yeah,
to
it's
get their
good.
story
They're
done?
Filling episodes, I think, sometimes.
But the neat thing about it is they take all the time they need for every little, family relationship and every little love side story, and so by the end you care about even the small characters that are insignificant to the main story. And
The casting.
but I don't think there was any swearing in it. The violence would be punching and sci-fi kind of stuff. So nothing there. No nudity. I don't even think there's really any. No one seduces anyone. It's a family in space with a bunch of other families trying to survive, and
The
will they or
good guys
won't
are
they?
good guys, the bad guys are bad guys.
Don't
And
say
there's-
anything.
Yeah, there's no moral ambiguity, I would say. At least
Yeah.
not yet.
We watched the Bicentennial Man.
Yes. Okay, that was what I wanted to hear now. And Xander, you can pipe in too. So what'd you guys think? You texted me a little bit about it.
Yeah, so what'd you think, Xander, of Bicentennial Man?
It was good, but it made you go on the wrong side.
How so?
Well, it made you go on the robot side. It made you think he should be like human and have human rights, but like logically speaking, we wouldn't be on that side.